Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Brooklyn-based jazz pianist and composer Andrew Boudreau. He opened up about his debut album, the 2022 CD called Neon. He talked about COVID life and his history in music. Over time, he has formed a strong emotional connection to particular places, whether as a native Nova Scotia or his longtime home of Montreal, or the surroundings of New England Conservatory in Boston, or his current daily environment in Brooklyn, New York. His album Neon is a collection of pieces that mostly have a specific geographic stamp, a poetic linkage in his mind. He continues to be a big part of the North American, international, and creative music scenes. Enjoy this conversation.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out. I appreciate it. What I want to do first and foremost is talk about Neon, but kind of under the context of what we're living through with COVID, kind of coming out of this pandemic and the timing of this, but the potential to perform live shows to promote this. How does this release feel for you right now?
Well, it's certainly been an interesting time for everyone that I'm, fairly certain of. We were fortunate to be able to record the music in August 2021, which was, a moment where things seemed to be more relaxed, certainly when compared with a lot of other times in the last couple of years. We were, able to do an album release concert a few weeks ago in February in Brooklyn at Soapbox Gallery, and happy that we could also live stream that concert for people that were out of town and, perhaps someone who might have been at home anyway in New York. We also played a release show at Bar by You in Brooklyn. We're looking forward to a couple more shows in New York in April, but the traveling part is certainly tricky. I'm Canadian, so obviously I would love to bring these musicians with me back to Canada, but until a few weeks ago that was basically impossible. And now it certainly looks much more possible, but then there's the issue of, making all those plans and then hoping they might actually work out.
So talk to me about this album, what you're hoping the listener gets from this. What did you ultimately pour into it as far as your voice, and what are you hoping the listener gets from this?
I think for me, the album is really, sort of a collection of vignettes of with a sort of, a lot of them have to do with a really specific place rather than maybe like a geographical location. I'm from Canada and I'm from Nova Scotia on the East Coast and lived for a few years in Montreal. So I think those two places have an indelible, impression on the music that I make, and there's certainly, places I think about all the time. Just other things that have affected me, like books I read or pieces of art that I think are really, really great and that sort of thing. So it's kind of I guess it's sort of little moments that have stayed on my mind over the years, hopping around the East Coast and that sort of thing.
So over this time of quarantine and solitude, so to speak, we've all had to look within and figure some things out. What did you learn about yourself that maybe you didn't realize before this pandemic that is going to make you stronger as you get out and promote this album and do live shows?
That's a great question. I definitely learned that I think I perhaps always knew this, but that I think, I take a lot of my musical or artistic energy from the scene that is around me. So I found that to be, I'm really glad that is back in many ways. Because I find that's one of the things that's the most energizing about being in New York and having all these musicians and other creative people around is I find that to be really inspiring and really motivating to me. But having lived through a pretty substantial time where that wasn't possible, the big thing for me was being able to get outside, actually. Whether it was in Brooklyn or whether it was in a location with more trees or more water, perhaps. So if I couldn't have, my community in the same room, then I really just wanted to be outside, that's for sure.
So talk to me about your beginnings. How did jazz become your life, and how did you get interested in music, kind of where you're born and raised too?
Before I knew anything about jazz, I played the piano. So I think that was sort of the most important thing for me, actually. A lot of people come to jazz from, they say, I heard Kind of Blue and that was it, For me, I had been playing the piano for many years as a kid before I'd even really heard any jazz at all. And then as the years went on, I had, certainly, well, I guess I've always been playing the piano. But as the years have gone on, then I, discovered jazz when I was kind of in high school, and really fell in love with that. The records of my fellow Canadian Oscar Peterson and Keith Jarrett made a big impression, and then certainly everything fanned out from there, moving later and earlier in the history.
So what about the first live jazz show you ever saw that really made you think, man, that's beautiful, I'd like to do that?
The first live jazz show that I ever saw was in Nova Scotia, and it was a quintet with 5 Canadian musicians, and it was saxophonist and pianist Phil Dwyer with the multi-instrumentalist Don Thompson, who was from Toronto and played piano, vibraphone, and bass. In that concert, he didn't play bass, but I remember being really sort of floored that Phil and Don would share the piano, and then either of them would play saxophone or vibraphone. That was something I didn't really consider was an option, or I didn't realize was an option as a kid in high school. And that was a really fantastic concert.
How did everything begin for you? How did your career kind of begin and start taking off? How did the gigs mount and get to where we're at today?
Well, I went to school in Montreal and stayed there for a few years for 3 years, and then I moved to Boston to do a master's at New England Conservatory. And then once I graduated from NEC in Boston, like many of my friends in Boston, we all took the plunge and moved to New York. And that's where I've been since the summer of 2018. So it's just been a lot of, being in New York and going out to see lots of music and meeting people, and yeah, it's been lots of fun, even despite a few hiccups in the last couple of years.
What do you like the best about being a professional musician? Every day you wake up, this is your life, this is what you get to do. What's the best part of it?
I think that I don't know what's going to happen. I think that's the best part. As a pianist, my favorite thing is actually to, collaborate with other people and outside of my own project. I love this project, and I think, I'm so lucky that I have these 3 musicians with me, but my favorite thing is to, wake up and say, what am I doing today? Which, headed to a rehearsal or recording something or going to play a gig, that sort of thing. I like that, every day. I think it's a bit of a cliche to say that every day is different, but I think when you're playing music, it truly is the case.
What if you had a jazz time machine DeLorean that pulled up and you could go anywhere and see anybody in the history of jazz? Who would you go see?
I would travel to the early 60s, and I would go to Las Vegas because I know that Sarah Vaughan did a string of gigs with Chick Corea, and I have heard rumors that there is a bootleg kicking around somewhere, and I can't find it. So I would love to see Sarah Vaughan play with Chick Corea. I think that would be really fantastic. Now I'm thinking of tons of other times I would like to go back to and see in addition, but if I had to pick one, I think that, because I know that there is some recording that exists, and I haven't been able to find it yet. So I'm still on the hunt.
Well, let's stick to the whole live thing, seeing music, because we've been away from it largely for 2 years now. And I'm curious, what do you hope we all understand or realize about the power of live music when we get back to it in earnest?
Well, I think one of the big things is that, the big thing for me is that I think live music sort of reaches all of us in a different way. One thing that I noticed being in New York is that I think it was maybe in June 2021 that I sort of saw my first live concert again, and I remember hearing the person who was playing say, "Wow, isn't this so great that we can finally do this again?" And then I'd actually noticed that over many months, I kept hearing the same thing. It was all of these musicians saying, isn't this so great we can do this? Or, this is my first live gig indoors again, that sort of thing. So I think the big thing is that, it's just because we think for one reason that life has changed or is back to some version of what it used to be, or everything is all set now, or that sort of thing. It's, that might mean something different to other people, depending on where we are too. But for me, being able to go see live shows fairly consistently, especially in the last while, has been so amazing. And even though hearing that sort of sentiment of realizing that it may not have come back as quickly for some people as for others, that it's still so important. And just being able to hear music in the same room, I think, is, one of my favorite things that exists. So
Absolutely. Yeah, it's huge. So everyone has a perception of you, an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life and you have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
I guess the big thing for me is that I hope that people realize that I'm just sort of making music that feels right to make, or that I didn't know that I really wanted to hear. Just sort of looking for something that I haven't already heard before, haven't sort of played before.
Cool, man. Andrew, thank you for opening up. Thanks for talking about the music. Good luck with the album and return to the stage.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Montreal, Brooklyn, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Andrew for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.